Sorry, guys. Hey, guys. Good afternoon. Thanks a lot. Welcome to this panel conversation on what does an insight-driven business look like. My name is Frederic Giron. I'm a research director at Forrester. Excited to welcome you to this conversation with 4 industry experts. I'm going to introduce them very quickly. Tomasz Kurczyk, who is the Chief Transformation and Digital Officer at AXA. Welcome, Tomasz.
Hey, welcome. Thank you.
Arvind Mathur, who is the CIO AMEA, Kellogg Company. Welcome, Arvind. Ramesh Munamarty, who is the Group Chief Information Officer, Digital and Technology at NTUC Enterprise Co-operative. Welcome, Ramesh. And last but not least, Geoff Soon, Managing Director of South Asia for Snowflake. Welcome, Geoff.
Thanks, Frederic.
So what we're going to do over the next 30-40 minutes is we will converse around this topic of insight-driven businesses. And I reckon that many companies have different ways of talking about this. I mean, some of them use this idea of being data first or data driven, right? So there are different ways of describing this, but we're gonna use this insight-driven terminology for this panel. And before we dive into the questions and the conversation, I wanted to reflect on some of the important trends that we are seeing at Forrester. Around this insight-driven business transformation. And in many aspects, it seems that becoming insight-driven has been accelerated by the current environment. I mean, just think about how global supply chains have been disrupted by the pandemic. And as a result of this, we have seen many organizations trying to drastically rethink their planning processes to become much more adaptive, increasing the frequency of their sales and operations meetings, trying to use new different sources of data as well. And the end goal was really to try and optimize the operations in an environment and in reality that is really that is changing very fast on an almost day-to-day basis, right? So fast data, fast insights is really at the core of these initiatives. But I think there's 2 factors that are driving this interest for insight-driven transformations, and one of them was really already there before the start of this pandemic, and obviously the second one is about the pandemic. The first one is the realization that digital insights are the new currency of global growth, right? When you think about it, organizations, as they are becoming more digital, our customers, our partners, our products are becoming more digital, which means that they produce more data. So I guess the goal, in essence, of an insight-driven business is to be able to capture that data, analyze it, generate insights, and then take actions based on these insights in order to try and improve specific business outcomes or customer outcomes or even employee outcomes. So that's the first one. The second one is, as I said, linked to the pandemic and linked to the reality that we operate in, which is quite unstable and unpredictable. Forrester talks about this new unstable normal, right? And that's where data and the ability to analyze and use this data in real time or close to real time will give organizations the ability to adapt their operations, to be more resilient, to be more innovative as well, and to keep on growing. So let me ask with, start with a first question for the panel. Do you agree with this approach? And more specifically, have you seen the role and the perception of data change due to the pandemic? I mean, from what data was perceived maybe 6 months ago, 9 months ago before the pandemic, and what the role of data is perceived today within your organization. And maybe Arvind, if you want to kick us off.
Yeah, sure. So, first of all, Fred, thank you for the session. Very good topic. And I'd like to say something about what you started with by defining, what is an insights-based organization. And the way I'd like to look at it is, I don't think that businesses are suddenly becoming insights-driven. I would submit actually that if you really talk to business leaders, they've always been insights-driven, right? That's how businesses run. The difference, though, is that in the past, it would take a business leader years, often decades, to develop a feel for the data and the insights so that they can develop an instinct, almost a gut feel for decisions. And that was the process to become insights driven, right? If you look at any any senior leader at a successful company, they know their numbers very deeply. You know, which consumer segments, which markets, what's my share, did my share go up or down when I did this promotion or that new product launch, what worked, what didn't work. Good business leaders have always had this instinct and this insight and feel for data. What's changed, like you rightly said, is that the amount of data now available is so large and it's changing so fast, and the impact of that change is so significant that business leaders are starting to struggle with that. That's one. I think the other factor also is that you do not have the luxury now of waiting for years and decades to develop that instinct for data. So there's this hunger for now, you know, not just the marketing directors and general managers, but brand managers and people even at the starting level of the organization to develop that instinct from the first few years in the business. And that's where I think the role of data and analytics really comes in and can completely change the game. I think that's what's driving it, and nothing has made it even sharper more than the COVID situation. I can speak for instance in our business, in Kellogg consumer goods food business. In many ways, foods was one of the few, unfortunately, beneficiaries of the situation. Packaged foods was initially picked up as people loaded their pantries when the panic set in, and then also as more people are working from home, eat at home foods, which is where Kellogg's plays quite significantly, consumption has grown. So it's been very important for our business leaders to understand these trends, and they're changing on a daily, weekly basis. Are we in the pantry loading phase? Are we in the phase where consumption at home is growing? As things open up, is that pattern changing? So these are very important aspects, and these are changing on literally weekly basis that we've got to stay on top of. Another shift that is happening is purchase is shifted very significantly from stores to online. And how is that shifting? What perceptions are happening? What drives e-commerce? There's a lot of data and change that's happening that has been very useful for us to be on top of.
Interesting. Thanks, Arvind, for sharing this. Geoff, I want to move to you, and do you agree with this? I know that you're using a lot of data within your sales operations. I was curious to hear from you as well.
Yeah, look, Frederic, I think one of the interesting things is we're a hyper-growth company. So we grew about 173% year on year, and we have to make investment decisions on where we're going to deploy our service. 12 months ago, I could pop on a plane, fly to India, do a site survey, speak with business leaders, speak with potential customers, and also back that up with data that corporate had assembled. When we look over our next 12 months of planning, the whole concept of doing a site visit is out the window. I'm pretty much making decisions on where to invest based in Singapore. So I think data and multiple sources of data, not within just our organization, but from upstream partners, downstream partners, has been absolutely critical in determining where we, invest. The second thing that's absolutely changed is I'll really agree that I think the C-suite and senior management has always had access to data. From the very day one of an operations, systems were put in place to make that happen. What has had to change dramatically because of COVID and because of the fact that many of us are working remotely is that the ability to get access to data and make decisions has to get closer and closer to the front line. And that's where we've really seen quite a significant transformation in terms of empowering our frontline sellers, our frontline operators to have the data they need, but then also to create the culture and the cadence so they're forced to use it. There's no point rolling out, 1,000 dashboards of Tableau to all your frontline staff if whenever you do a weekly meeting, you go back to Excel, your notebook, and pens and papers. So I think these two things have been quite critical, not only empowering our frontline with these tools, but creating a cadence and a process to ensure that they have to adopt it as part of their day-to-day activities.
Yeah, I like that. So reducing the cycle time in between the creation, the generation of the data and insights and the actions, right? So yeah, bringing them as close as possible. And I think that's what's really, I agree with you, Arvind, you know, this idea of insight-driven, it's not necessarily new, but it's really about closing the gap in between when the data is generated and when the action is taken. And it's not enough to, you know, wait for weeks or months or quarters sometimes to use this data. It's too late, right? The data becomes obsolete. And I like, Geoff, you know, we'll come back towards the end of this panel to talk about how do you drive adoption, because you know, it's a critical component in this cultural transformation. But I want to stay on the COVID piece for a minute and moving to Thomas. You know, I know Thomas, I know great work that you have done with AXA for many years now, and you've been using you know, advanced analytics technologies in order to help you improve specific business outcomes. I was curious to hear from you. Did COVID break some of these models that you use, right? Because of the fact that we've seen drastic changes in terms of how employees are behaving, how customers are behaving because of the pandemic. So how did that happen, and how did you approach you know, getting your models back on track, right?
So thank you, Fred. Actually, we were very lucky because, as you mentioned, we've been investing for a long time. So actually, we had almost no disruption, even the things like circuit breaker was imposed from day to day. Almost no disruption, and in areas where there was some disruption, especially the parts of the business where we relied on BPO, the business process outsourcing in some other parts of the world, we were able to recover quite quickly and shift the gears, reconfigure, and go back to the business as usual. When you talk about the impact, I'm trying to be more positive. See, you know, I think there's a quote from Winston Churchill that no crisis should be wasted, and here we had a perfect example, and I think it fits well to the context of the discussion with the data and how to shorten the cycle. Is one area where we had a large impact is of course our sales, direct sales teams. That means our agents, because most of all the operations is done face to face. We managed to equip them with the tools. We had already some tools that we were trying to push and shift their approach and make them our affiliates. So to act as affiliates, not so much as a traditional sales agent. Of course, the journey was not easy because, but over the years, but with COVID, actually, since people cannot meet the customers face to face, the adoption was 100% overnight. So it was a great outcome. And as well as we use this time to educate because provide the tools, it's one, provide the data and the insights so they can see clearly what's in real time, the impact, what they are doing, how they're engaging with the customers, how they're engaging on social media and direct channels. But there was one missing component, which is they didn't understood necessarily. They understand that something is going up or down, but they were not necessarily able to piece the full picture because there was a gap in understanding of the full ecosystem. So there was, and this is I think it's quite common across, that when you're shortening the cycle from the execution of tests to identify the trends, still a large part of the organization doesn't understand necessarily the ecosystem, the full ecosystem on the digital world, and it's not able to piece together all the facts. So this is the one area where we've been investing, and we're planning to invest even more to make sure that everyone is able to take the full advantage of the capabilities that we provide and operate much better, because today every business needs to be a digital business.
Makes sense. So I want to move us to the execution piece, right? So how do you become an insider in the business? And maybe let's start with technology. And Ramesh, I believe that you have a very strong expertise there. So if you can share, you know, from your perspective, where should organizations start their inside business transformation from a technology perspective.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you for giving the opportunity to speak at this event. First, I would like to call out that whatever I'm going to say is not specific to NTUC, and I'm not representing NTUC in any way. So I'm speaking from my overall experience. So in order to become insights-driven, there are three different areas of data that an organization needs to go through. First, they need to be able to capture data. Then they need to analyze, and then finally take some action based on whatever they've analyzed. So in each of these, let me just give you a brief overview of some of the trends that I'm seeing that are emerging in the data capture and in the analytical space and the actionable space. So first with data capture, there were previously a number of companies were just relying on broadcasting or segmenting the data and not necessarily on mining it effectively. As the previous presenter said, that there's only about 20% of the data or so that is getting analyzed, right? So now with technology, people are moving on to having better technology with recommenders and predictors that allow companies to capture website behavioral tracking, such as abandoned baskets, integrating from heterogeneous data sources, and then driving a centralized data lake, and then driving insights from that lake. So having a lake is pretty critical. As Arvind was mentioning, the difference between the past and now is the incredible amount of data, and that the decision makers will not be able to have data at their fingertips unless technology allows them to give it to them in that fashion, right? So what I'm seeing, ultimately, obviously the gold standard is to be able to do predictive data capture, where you don't need human interventions such as user clicks, but you can predict based on intent. Not organizations have moved to that level of data capture, but that's where I see things going, and people are leveraging things such as blockchains, decentralized consensus algorithms to clean, validate, and make the data more usable. Yeah. Another speaker had also mentioned about AI/ML. I think this is a clear case of where an augmentation is happening with leveraging bots than leveraging expensive data scientists to do the cleansing and preparation of the data. So bots leveraging AI/ML can really do a lot of the cleansing and value and the preparation, and allowing data scientists to focus more on the analytical part, which is obviously fairly complex. Now, in order to analyze, the data lake is as I mentioned, is fairly critical, and data virtualization is helping create a middleware between the data sources and the actual consumers. So the actual analysis, there have been major advances made in data science that is allowing people to do proper modeling, and then we've seen a dramatic increase in data analytic experts even within business units. So it's no longer restricted just to IT department. Business unit folks have become pretty good at this, and they are the trend that I'm seeing is people are leveraging NLP and conversational analytics to make content more accessible. Yeah. Finally, I think the crux of it is there's no point analyzing all of this if you don't action on it. And this is where I see a closed loop system being implemented, where if you see in the past, IoT didn't really succeed quite a bit because incredible amount of data was just being captured and not a lot of refinement was being made to figure out what is being captured, how it's being captured. So I think the closed loop system will now give feedback back to the sensors, make sure that the appropriate data is being captured, and then the data that is being captured will be much more useful than just a massive data dump. And finally, I think predictive and actionable analytics will allow enterprises to take more targeted actions, right? So to drive specific business outcomes rather than traditionally in the past, quarter after quarter, we just used to do post-mortem analysis. It was too late. Now with the help of technology, it'd be great if we can predict something that's coming in and then take corrective action in a timely manner. So these are all the different areas, I think, where technology trends are going to make a difference in how we analyze and drive into being truly an insight-driven enterprise.
Thanks a lot, Ramesh. And I agree with you that emerging tech, including advanced visualization and AI, ML, and so on, will help on this journey to become this insight-driven businesses. I think it's for most organizations it's still future state though, right? And there's probably a intermediary step where they will have to create processes with people. Not only technology, but people are still quite important in order to make this, feedback loop, for instance, that you were talking about, a reality. So I wanted to open, to Arvind, Geoff, Ramesh, Thomas. How are you building these processes with your people, especially on the business side, right? Because that's where there needs to be an integration in between technology realm and the business realm, right? Within your organization. So I love what Thomas said about using the crisis as an opportunity, and that your agents had to embrace these technologies and these dashboards and these tools and these insights, because there was no other way for them to do their job. But again, maybe for other organizations, it's not as simple. So what are the processes, and maybe we can touch upon the adoption. I mean, how do you drive adoption of these processes within your organization? Geoff, you wanna start on that?
Yeah, look, I think one of the most important things is to really prove the value of the insights. It's very, very easy to do a big rah-rah, get everyone going and start to execute on these processes. But ultimately, if the frontline agents or the sellers don't actually see a net benefit, then these things tend to fizzle out. So I think what we're very focused on is ensuring that there's always accountability and there's always a review. If you distill an insight, execute on the insight, what's the process to check back in 30, 60, 90 days that you're actually on the right track? So I think, one of the key things that we do is not only design and execute programs, it's to ensure that all these programs have a very robust feedback loop so you can course correct. I think given COVID, rather than taking 6 months or 12 months to course correct, many of us are now in a situation that we need to course correct on a monthly, if not bi-monthly basis.
Exactly. So it's about trust as well, right? I mean, show me that I can trust that data, I can trust that insights.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's about the trust and the validation. I think nothing gets anyone in the field or the front line more upset when they're getting all these recommendations, to getting all these metrics, and it doesn't reconcile with what they see in the field. So I think, the minute you've got that reconciliation, you can, as you said, build the trust in the data. You then start to develop more and more trust in the recommendations that are being provided to you on how to execute into the field.
Thanks a lot, Geoff. We have questions, so I wanted to maybe take the opportunity to look at some of the questions that the audience has asked, and feel free to ask any questions for the panel. Happy to take them as they go. So we have one around the topic that we were just talking about, right? So for insight-driven, the data science and business owners need to work closer together, right? I mean, unfortunately, we think about insight-driven business as being a team sport, right? So you need to have a strong collaboration in between different teams. It is difficult, though, to find a data scientist with domain knowledge, and then the question is, can technology help, or is this an organizational structure issue? So I think, Ramesh, you touch upon the technology bit. So maybe we can talk about organizational structure. I mean, is there a typical organizational structure model that you reckon is something that organizations should think about when implementing these insight-driven business transformations?
I can, sorry, Ramesh, are you going ahead, please?
No, go ahead, Arvind. I can chime in after that.
Yeah, So I completely agree. I think this is a pretty big change in how organizations are set up, I think, to take advantage of data, plus also a lot of other technology trends. The way technology today drives every aspect of the business requires people in the business to be digital natives, frankly. I think this is more than anything else the biggest trend, and what we as, and I think here we are also kind of blended group, right? We're not purely technologists here. And I think that's really important. So one of the things that we're doing here in my current company, also previous companies, is we've invested a lot of effort in helping business people develop an instinct for technology, and to conversely help technology people develop the instinct for business. And when you put those two kind of people together, magic happens, really, right? And so on this, some examples, right? And I'll take them from my current industry, manufacturing. Simple things like we need engineers on the shop floor to have this mindset of, hey, how can I predict failure on the lines before it has the potential to shut down my line, and treat this as a as a preventive maintenance opportunity rather than a break fix situation, right? And we've had situations where engineers like that, who have that mindset, have been able to figure out that, you know what, we can, to Ramesh's point, you can install this vibration sensor, and it's over the first few weeks when machine is running smoothly, it collects data and figures out what's normal patterns of vibration. And the moment it sees something which is out of the ordinary, it says there's something here about to fail, and you fix it. And ideas like that are starting to come from engineers, from field salespeople, from people in finance, etc. And that's the sign that the organization is ready to become more data-driven and insights-driven. There's a long way to go still there, but we're making the steps in that direction.
So I'd just like to add on to that. I think what I've seen being really successful is what works well even in software development, right? So having Scrum team concepts where you have multiple people join together in order to get the respective outcome. So it's impossible to think that the data scientist, or one should not even think that the data scientist knows all the answers, unless you pair up that data scientist with an appropriate data engineer who can analyze, who can extract the data, pair him up or her up with a business expert who understands the business extremely well, is the business domain expert. Pair that person up again with someone who can redesign processes and make sure that the process redesign is happening and not just the data extraction and analysis. So, and finally, someone who can actually go and implement that and analyze the data that's coming out of it. So I think it's very similar to creating a cross-functional team that is a amalgamation of people coming from the business, people coming from technology, people coming from process, and people coming from HR, all of them coming together to really drive the appropriate outcome, and not relying on the poor data scientist who just understands mathematical models to become now the business expert and trying to say, okay, how do I reduce churn, right? I mean, it's just, he can come up with a mathematical model, but not implement that, right? So I think it's a very good question, and it's a lot has to do with the organizational design.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, finding good data scientists is already difficult, but if you need to also bring in, the domain expertise, that's what I call a powerful squirrel, right? So I think we are reaching the end of our time, allocated time. So, but I wanted to. There's a last question on the chat. According to the panelists, what are the top obstacles typically faced by organizations to get a fully insight-driven enterprise? So if we can do maybe a round with each one of you, and if you can give us in just a few seconds, what are the key obstacles that organizations need to think about and prepare for before they engage in this transformation? Geoff, you wanna start?
Sure. I think the most common challenge that we still see is data is still trapped in bunkers and silos all around the organization, in your CRM system, in your mobile applications, in your on-premise systems. So I think, you know, having a strategy to break down those barriers is really going to be quite critical to enable, you know, an organization to be truly data or insight driven.
Thanks, Geoff. Thomas?
So yeah, definitely data democratization is one. Second is the education, and the third one is aligning the incentives, because to make sure that the things are not done for the sake of doing them. It's clearly aligned with the business targets, and the KPIs and the incentives are tracked towards achieving the business targets, because this is what drives empowerment.
That's a really good point. We haven't touched upon these incentives, but it's a very important lever to consider as well. Ramesh?
I think one of the main obstacles that I have seen is really the culture and the mindset of the organization, getting them to change, to start embracing a very transparent decision-making process. And having a clear trust-based governance. Data governance, I think, is fairly a big challenge within enterprises, especially where you don't have a very good idea around the data lineage, data quality, the cleanliness of the data. And as Geoff was saying, it's trapped in all these different places. So how do you really make sure that the authenticity of data is validated, and making sure that you have the right data to begin with? And then the culture of actually taking action with that data. I mean, I've seen enterprises generate tons of reports and spend tons of money on data scientists. And when it ultimately filters up, they're not really making effective use of decision making. They still rely on their old methods of decision making, based on gut feel and so forth, not necessarily on data. So it's a big change. I think it's a cultural mindset. There needs to be a significant amount of education and training to monitor the effectiveness, and a collaborative culture and governance process that encourages broad participation, and it just doesn't become a technology project.
That's a good point. And Arvind, last few words of wisdom for you.
I would agree with Thomas and Ramesh, actually, that the biggest challenge is, I think, sometimes cultural, because like Ramesh said, when you do something like this in an organization that has not done it, it creates a level of transparency which is very jarring, actually, initially. And both the people who treated data as an asset and gave them power need to deal with it differently, and also the people who suddenly have transparency that they were dependent on others on need to also be responsible about it. What often is the first challenge that happens is somebody who was getting a very massaged piece of information suddenly starts getting this, and they start asking questions, and I have seen that kill these efforts so often. Because the person who's allowing the transparency basically said, no, hang on, shut this down. I need to control the message.
That's exactly right. Thanks. I think we reached the top of the hour. I wish we would have a lot more time to discuss with you guys. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and your expertise on that. Sundi, back to you.
No worries. Thank you, Frederic, and thank you all the panelists. I mean, I really appreciate the insights from some very eminent industry leaders here.